To all the people who work as scarers in haunted houses, what were some of your best reactions? I got one of those really big buff men to let out the highest pitched scream I've ever heard. He almost punched me but stopped himself. I'm trying to imagine that. Not a worker, but when I was kid, like 6 or 7, I went to a haunted house with my dad. While we were walking through, a staff member with a Jason mask and a huge cleaver appears out of nowhere. He bangs his cleaver on a table near my hand and screams at me. I was scared out of my ever-loving mind, but my panic reaction was to ask an adult for help, and since he was the only adult around, I blurted out, in the tiniest kid voice, "Where's the exit?" He growled again, which scared me again, which made me ask again, much louder this time, "Where's the exit?" So he pointed with his cleaver and snarled once more. There was a hint of sadness in his final growl. In hindsight, I think it probably looked to him like he couldn't scare a child. I want to go back in time and let him know it was one of the scariest moments of my life. But my parents had trained me very well. Sorry, anonymous Jason, I didn't mean to emasculate you. I found that this is common. It's easy to startle a kid, but to get a prolonged scared reaction just doesn't happen half the time. I don't know if it's because they feel safe with their parents or if they know it's fake or they accept that it's real and don't know the world enough to know it's scary, but whatever the reason, a lot of times a jump scare and a quick shriek seems to be the best you can hope for, and honestly, I prefer that. I don't want to terrify children. I was walking through a haunted house and there was a skeleton in a wedding dress laying in a casket. A zombie guy in a tuxedo jumped out from behind the wall and screamed, "Don't look at my wife." Me, being the funny try-hard teen I was, responded, "Sorry man, she's just so hot." He replied, "Yeah, she'll give you a real boner." I think about that all the time. Props to that haunted house worker. Effing son. I volunteered at one in Vancouver that was run by a guy who used to be in the movie business. He had the most amazing stuff and I suspect a lot of it was former movie props or costumes. The best thing was this giant like 10-12 feet tall ring wraith that he'd prop up in the front yard, and it was so big that people assumed it was a stationary prop, like part of the setting, but the arms could be moved by levers from someone hiding under the robes. The MO was to stay very still, wait for people to meander through the graveyard and then suddenly swoop at them. That freaked people out. My best scare was with the ring wraith, a big buff guy, at least 6'3", clearly a bodybuilder, who yelped and then immediately grabbed his girlfriend date, who was this tiny Asian woman and weighed all of 100 pounds probably, and used her as a human shield. Not just like pulled her in front of him, but actually picked her up a bit while doing it. The house was really great. Free to enter. Donations all went to charity, but being a scarer is a thankless business. I don't know how many times I've been punched by kids and teenage boys because their reaction to fear is aggression. Oftentimes it was a delayed reaction too, like you'd scare them, they'd yelp or jump back, and then like 3 seconds later, because they embarrassed themselves in front of their little buddies, they'd run back or run up and give you a quick punch and run away. My best scare was with the ring wraith, a big buff guy, at least 6'3", clearly a bodybuilder, who yelped and then immediately grabbed his girlfriend date, who was this tiny Asian woman and weighed all of 100 pounds probably, and used her as a human shield. LMAO, you probably ended that relationship. I like how people, boys especially, it seems, will get embarrassed about being scared and think assaulting a worker will make them look better. Not a scarer, but my kid once got the whole attraction shut down. A local haunted Halloween place that was a tradition for us to visit every year had a house of horrors. It was the standard old farmhouse turned into a maze of rooms and hallways filled with monsters and creatures. Speakers blaring WHOOOO sounds, fake cobwebs and the whole bit. And of course darker than a coal mine as a whole. You had to be 7 years old to enter, and my youngest daughter had waited 4 years to get to go when finally she was old enough, and so stoked to finally experience what her older sister and friends had promised her was going to be like totally awesome. Well, we made it slightly less than halfway through. It was zombie grandma that popped out of a closet that did her in. Kid had lungs like a free diver and used them well that day. She also tore loose from my hand and bolted like a startled deer, disappearing into the murky depths of the building. Everything came to a screeching halt. Staff turned on all the lights, herded all the other visitors outside and helped me look for her. We found her squeezed in behind the vampire's coffin. hands clapped over her ears and eyes tightly shut. I picked her up and she clung to me like an octopus for the rest of the day. She remembers the event clearly but hasn't suffered any lasting mental trauma. She still loves Halloween. Honestly, I think losing a kid in one of these things is far scarier than the thing itself. While in my 40s, I went to a haunted house with a friend of similar age and experience. As we were walking out, she said, "It was pretty scary, but not nearly as scary as losing your kid in a grocery store." Not a professional, but one I did many years ago. The wife and I had a party to go to on Halloween. I had gotten dressed up, a very urbane devil, red jacket, red tie, black slacks, black silk shirt, red makeup on neck and face, teeth partly blacked out to make fangs, 2 horns sprouting from my forehead, hair slicked back and tinted red. Before we left we were ready for a few early trick-or-treaters, and I had been handing out candy on the front porch when I saw a father and little girl walking down the sidewalk. She was maybe 6, dressed as a princess. The father was being a good sport, but neither had seen me yet, so I stood perfectly still, the candy bowl in my hands about stomach height, and I waited. The father saw me, and he got the sheeting grin on his face and told his daughter to go get some candy. He stayed at the bottom of the driveway and she started walking up, got halfway, actually saw me and stopped dead in her tracks. She looked back and Dad waved her on to go. He looked up at me and winked, so I knew I was covered. She came up, slowly, watching me, but I had the 1,000-yard stare going on, only seeing her out of my peripheral vision. She paused again right in front of me and looked back. Dad called out, "Take a piece, honey." She turned back to me, reached up and carefully took one piece of candy from the bowl. She turned back to her dad and yelled, "I did it." I leaned down and growled in a menacing tone, "Take 2. Yeah," she screamed. Dad laughed. She didn't get that second piece. She ran to quick. This is the best post in this thread by far. I've never worked at haunted houses, but here's a conversation I overheard near a haunted house, dedicated to all those who got punched for doing their job. Security patrol: "Don't touch the monsters won't touch you." Random kid: "What if I punch the monsters?" Security patrol: "The security will touch you." Ever so tenderly. A friend of mine got pepper sprayed twice. That was fun for him. Who TF gonna bring pepper spray to a damn haunted house with intent to use it? Seriously, this should be cause for assault charges. I have several stories. Done it for years. I was once knocked out. Worked in a house with a scare room where you peek behind blacked out curtains. You're not supposed to lean farther than the windowsill, but sometimes you're just in the moment. A guy turned a corner and was looking at the black light work on the wall and didn't notice me right beside him. I leaned as close as I could to him and just whispered to him. He collapsed to the ground and reached for anything he could grab, grabbed the back of my head, and I slammed my head into the sill. Next thing I know, I'm on the ground of the scare room. A co-worker steps over me and hands me a bottle of ibuprofen. Lol. I was once Nosferatu and scared a guy so bad he tried to clear the corner of rocks and props instead of run around it. He fell and tumbled down the other side, breaking 3 fingers. Another time I was part of a blacklight clown maze. The walls were fence. We kept jumping back and forth on the fences and this woman became so exhausted from screaming she passed out. We had to shut it down for a while until paramedics could arrive and get her out. She was terrified of clowns, so we couldn't be around her when she was waking up. We had to get our management out there for her while we waited outside. She really went to a clown maze when she's terrified of clowns? From what was understood, yeah, when she collapsed. A few other clowns and myself went over to her as caring human beings and her SO told us we need to get out of sight because she was afraid of clowns. I don't know why she went in. Lol. A little kid was on his dad's shoulders and when I was done yelling he said, "Who are you?" and I kid you not, I started laughing. I couldn't stop. His reaction was so calm and honest. Really is a story for the books. I worked for one for a few seasons. The best reaction I saw, but unfortunately I wasn't the one to cause, was a lady whose legs kept giving out from fear. She kept getting up quickly though, and the rest of the people in her party thought she kept dropping her keys, but she was dropping her whole self. The keys were in her pocket the whole time. Other than that, I just had a lot of edgy kids screaming random things when they got startled. Nothing like popping out at a teenage boy and then they just outright scream "Your mom gay" on reflex. I went to a haunted house with a couple of friends last year and one friend, who loves getting scared haunted houses, could not keep her legs under her. This scary clown kept following her and mimicking her, so every time she fell on her butt, he'd dramatically fall too, then pop up when she was trying to get up and scare her again. The maze was this long winding path that had a million shortcuts for the actors to run through, so he kept popping up out of nowhere and scaring her. The most fun I had at a haunted house ever. This was a student event, so not an actual job, I was just helping run it, but basically I had this great costume that had a black veil over the front of a hood, which meant no one could see my face, and so I stood very still in slightly awkward positions, lulling people into thinking I was a statue. I'd bide my time. To a few of the students would nervously prod me and I'd wobble like a statue but do nothing else. Then every so often, usually with someone coming in after a prodding one, I'd leap at them and go ragh. The best response, which I still feel guilty about, was this Chinese girl who literally fell onto her in shock and started bawling her eyes out. Such was the fright I gave her. Hey, I worked as a scarer in NZ. I really liked the place and it was fun to work at. They also made sure that we were always safe and people got kicked out if they didn't follow the rules. My best reaction was from a big guy who dropped backwards on the floor and screamed his lungs out after I did a long short scare. Long short is a scare where you shine a light on yourself from far away and then sneak up to the person and flash yourself again. One of my favorite ones. Not me, but I had a good friend who worked at a haunted house some years back, and a 15-year-old girl straight up kicked him in the nuts. He fell, complained, chased after her apparently to get her kicked out or something, and then it turned into this big thing. I only heard his side of the story, and he is a bit of an idiot, a lovable one, but still an idiot. I loved my short time volunteering at a haunted Harried. It was a fun excuse to get into the Halloween spirit and hang out with friends, scare a few people and then go to dinners at 2 AM while still dressed as zombies. As the point was to scare people, you kind of go for those that have the biggest reaction. Some of the people that scared the easiest had this little circular badge with flashing lights on it, which my friends and I assumed was one of those overpriced, gimmicky light up items you see at pretty much all night events. Some of these people would be scared out of their minds, cowering in the shoulder of whomever they were with. After a few nights of volunteering, my friend and I finally asked someone what those light up badges were for. As it turns out, those badges were purchasable while in line, for like $15, with the purpose of guests lighting it up if they were getting too anxious or frightened while on the ride. This way, the employees would know, hey, this person is probably going to have a panic attack. Go scare someone else. Unfortunately, this was never really conveyed to the volunteers, so my friends and I inadvertently had been targeting the poor people who paid extra at a haunted Harried to not be scared. Used to know a dude I'd rock climb with, and he was working at one of these haunted houses as a jack-in-a-box. So he jumps out one time and this proper muscular, manly dude let out a high-pitched scream and punched him straight in the nose by reflex. He now has a crooked nose.